Hello everybody, my name is John Eggers and I teach for Northwest Technical College in Bemidji, Minnesota. This morning I'm going to tell you about the brain, and I'm also going to use a grapefruit as an example of a brain. You should know this because it's going to make you a better teacher, it's going to make you a better leader, and I know it will make you a better public speaker. Well, what about the grapefruit as it relates to the brain? First of all, a grapefruit is about the same size as a brain. And inside, if we were to cut it open, it has two hemispheres like the brain, and the hemispheres are pink. This is a pink grapefruit, and our brain is pinkish because of the blood flowing through our brain. If it weren't for the blood flowing through our brain, we would drop over and be dead. It's also about the weight of a brain, about 3 pounds. And if we look at it more closely, we can see that it has two hemispheres. It has this middle section, which we can call the corpus callosum, which provides the message system between the two hemispheres. And it has the cortex around the brain. And in that cortex, that's where we have the neurons, the most important part of the brain. Let's talk about those neurons for a minute. You and I have about the same number of neurons, about 40 billion neurons or so. But I like to tell people that we have about a trillion neurons because I just like the number trillion. And we do have way more than a trillion connections in our brain. But let's just talk about this number trillion for a minute. For example, if you were to win the first, yes, you're going to win the first $1 trillion lottery, and you were given those $1 trillion in $1 bills, how long would it take you to count those $1 bills, 1 per second? Well, it would take you 1 trillion seconds, yes, but in terms of hours or weeks or months, how long would it take you to count? Actually, it would take you about 32,000 years to count to 1 trillion. Isn't that something? 32,000 years to count that. So that's how many connections we have in our brain. Well, what forms those connections and how do we get them? In this cortex, we have something, and you've heard the word dendrites before, neurons, and then we have the dendrites on the neurons, and when dendrites make a connection, that's when learning takes place. Well, each of those neurons may have, let's say, 100 or 1,000 dendrites. And if there's 40 billion neurons and you multiply that times 100 or 1,000 or whatever, you're going to get a big, big number. In fact, they calculated that number. If we were to write that number out in terms of the connections, it would travel from here to the moon and back 16 times, you see, that many. Well, neurons are very small. You can put 16,000 on the head of a pin, so it's not too difficult to imagine that many dendrites and connections in our brain. Well, why is that so important? Well, first of all, you see, because we have the same number of neurons, all of us, unless our brain has been damaged in some way, we have the same potential to learn anything we want to learn. Well, then how come this person over here can learn mathematics or science or take a motor apart faster or quicker or better than I can, see? Well, because in their particular brain, those neurons that deal with math and science maybe are more sophisticated. Maybe are configured more. Maybe they have more in that section of the brain. But in other parts of the brain, let's say that deals with maybe fishing walleyes or putting a motor together, maybe their neurons aren't so sophisticated, you see. So we all have the same potential. Some of us may just have to work harder at it, and that's really important to know. Some interesting things about the brain in terms of how it learns and how it remembers. One thing that it seems to capture novelty and enthusiasm almost instantly. That if you do something novel in your teaching, or if you are a particular novel leader in some way, or if you put something that's very novel in your speech, students are more likely to remember it, you see. So if I, for example, took this grapefruit and throw it right at the screen and said some nasty words, you'd probably remember that. Yes, you would, but I'm not going to do that, right? Well, so our brain seems to record novelty quickly. It also records emotion very quickly. All of those emotional moments you've had in your life, if you were married, if you had a child, when you caught your biggest walleye, maybe when you shot your first deer, maybe when you had a car accident, all of those emotional moments almost are instant memory, you see. This is why if you can put emotion and enthusiasm in whatever you do, people are more likely to remember it. Your brain will shut down under stress. This is why, again, why people who are in, let's say, public speaking, when they get in front of the audience for the first or second time, their brain wants to shut down because they're kind of nervous, they're under some stress, they're under some anxiety, and their brain shuts down. But if the more they give a speech, you see, over and over and over again, and they're in front of people and they're doing this and doing that, before long it becomes like anything else, like driving a car, like walking. We just get used to it. See? But usually under stress our brain shuts down. So remember that when you are working with people, that if they're under a stressful situation, not much learning is going to happen. The third thing you need to know is that and you know this already, that if you don't use your neurons, you're going to lose those neurons. That's right. This is why, for example, that we cannot speak any one language other than the language we were born speaking with, like English, for example. We had those neurons at one time. We had 70 phonemes, which allowed us to speak any language, but because we didn't use them, we just lost them. And this is why the older we get, it's more difficult to learn language, and why we should be teaching language at a very younger age than we do, because that's when those neurons are still ripe and they're ready to grow. So that's just a few things about the brain. But I think the thing you should remember most about the brain is the fact that you need to treat it kindly. You don't want to injure your brain. You don't want it to you don't want to lose neurons because you fried your brain with drugs or alcohol. And this is why today we are so concerned about concussions in the brain, because once you damage your brain, we don't have any other brain transplants yet. Maybe sometime in the future we will, but for now we don't. So take care of your brain, and we'll talk to you later.